Welcome to Included Not Excluded. I'm Tracie Coultas-Pitman, the Chief Exec of BeyondAutism. And today we're talking about something many parents might be wrestling with quietly. So as a parent, you may notice something about your child. Maybe it's communication, maybe it's toileting, maybe it's eating, sleep, stories, play, a whole range of things. And then the questions might begin. Am I overthinking this? Should I act now? Should I wait? Am I doing enough? Am I doing the right thing? Is there anyone who can help me? And many families listening today are parenting autistic children or children who may later receive a diagnosis. For autistic children in particular, differences in communication, sensory processing, regulation or toileting can be noticed early. Getting early support right can shape not just development, also confidence, belonging, and long-term educational inclusion. We're often told earlier the better when it comes to support. But what does that actually mean? How early is helpful? And when does early start to feel like pressure? So today's conversation is about early support, not as a single decision point, rather as something responsive, something that grows alongside the child and the family. And I'm delighted to be joined today by three brilliant guests. We've got Meg Harper, who is a regional manager at Dingley's Promise, Pam Fry, who is the chair of the National Portage Association, as well as being the CEO of PlayWise Learning, and Siân Wicks, who is the CEO of ERIC, the only children's bowel and bladder charity in the UK. Let's begin with early years settings, often the place where early questions first begin to surface. So Meg, I'm going to come to you first. Do you want to just introduce what Dingley's Promise is to our listeners as a first point, and then I'll get stuck into the questions?
Absolutely. So Dingley's Promise is a early years provision for children aged 0 to 5 with special educational needs. We have a number of centres across the UK, and within that we have the early years provision and centres for children. But we also have a family outreach service, so lots of family support happening out in the community. And we have a training team as well, which is working to help build the confidence of early years practitioners across the UK.
Brilliant. Thanks, Meg. So when we talk about early support in early years settings, what does that look like in practice before any diagnosis is mentioned?
So I think it's really about that needs focus piece. So it's about having that really strong relationship with the child, with the family, and using that observation, that assessment to really understand the needs of the individual child. It's about the support and everything that we can do prior to a diagnosis. We all know that waiting times are really long currently in the UK. So not focusing on the end result, but what the needs are telling us, what the child needs, what we can do to support them better. Looking at things like their play, is their play telling us that there's something different that they need from us? And also then looking at things like communication and interaction differences. We might have children that are pre-verbal. What can we do to enhance that communication in our environment? So using objects of reference, visual strategies. What is it about their behaviour that they're communicating a need to us? So really understanding the child, understanding how they regulate, how they feel safe.
That's really interesting, because I was going to ask, how do you balance the reassurance with action when talking to parents?
I think it's about being open and transparent. Parents typically like to hear that from us. They're already worried. So without piling on the extra pressure or joining them in that worry, it's about, yes, okay, we've noticed this too, but actually, this is what we're going to do to support you. This is what you can do at home. Sharing those strategies. If we've made a set of visuals in the setting, duplicate it, send it home, let them be using it so you're getting that consistency across all environments. And they feel like someone's holding their hand along that journey. We know from the parents that we support in our centres, it can be an incredibly isolating journey. It's very difficult for some of our families. So just having someone to sit shoulder to shoulder and taking on that responsibility with them.
Yeah. I think that the sharing of everything you're doing is really important, isn't it? Because often parents don't know what they don't know. So having access to that expertise is really important. So what are the most common areas where small early adjustments make the biggest difference, do you think?
I think it's getting those kind of strategies in place. If you've got an inclusive environment that is set up ready for every child that you may meet, you're in that proactive situation rather than reactive.
Thanks, Meg. So also, I think what's great not to be picking up in what you're saying is there's no sense of alarm. We're not like escalating concerns quickly. We're not causing alarm amongst families. Your staff are skilled and trained to be able to observe, and immediately the environment is set up to include and just to move forward with what the child needs rather than it becoming an issue. We have to wait. We don't know what that is. We'll sort that out. And I guess that leads to small, meaningful, thoughtful adjustments all the time.
Yeah, and it's all about us as, as teachers, as educators, those little adjustments throughout the day in your interactions with children. So you may need to give them extra processing time. It could be something as simple as just slowing down your pace and that real slow pedagogy that actually really supports a child. And then obviously when we are taking those next steps and we are making referrals for identified needs, it's just about being really transparent and sharing that process with the family, ensuring that they feel those processes are done with them and not to them, because sometimes we hear from families that a lot is done to them and they don't quite understand. There's lots of jargon being used. So really just making sure that whole situation is a place of psychological safety for everyone involved.
Thanks, Meg. I'd like to bring Pam in at this point because everything you've just described there, Meg, is also something I've known over the years I've been involved in this sector from the Portage service and how it works with the families. So, Pam, first of all, tell us a little bit about Portage now. I'm really interested to hear about how Portage is working nationally now.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. I'm the chair of the National Portage Association, which is it provides a quality framework for the portage services that we have around the UK. In England, we've got about 101, or I say about 101, we've got 101 portage services that are registered with us. And Portage, in my eyes, I know I'm biased, but is the most incredible service ever. We get the privilege of working directly with children and families in the parents' home, in the family home. We have the pleasure of breaking everything down into really small steps, working on the child's strength, using what's working well to develop children's skills further. So it's not just about the hands-on teaching and the support in the family environment. It's about, I guess, as much as I hate the word normalizing, but it is about normalizing things for families, going to groups, going to the park, taking day trips, meeting other families, all the things that neurotypical families take for granted that are just easy. So the Portage service creates those opportunities to just do what everyone else is doing, really.
Brilliant. So when families first reach out or are first referred to Portage, what emotional space are they usually in?
Probably a complete state of terror and fear. No parent wants their child to be different or to have difficulties or challenges that sets them apart from their other child, their siblings, or from other families. So families are very anxious, nervous about what we're going to say, about what it means for the future. And I think the joy of Portage is that often families have gone through the medical model first. So they're told your child can't do this is not going right, this is not working well. Whereas Portage is very much based on a strength-based model, and it's about celebrating success. It's about looking at the things that are going well, things that the child is doing really, really well. But the families have a lot of questions. They may feel that they're frustrated because they've been waiting for a long time to access a service, to receive support. We know lots of families will go to their GP worried about, their child's language, play, social interactions, and are told, just wait until they're 2. Well, if you're seeing those signs early on and you're being told you have to wait, it's very frustrating. We also know that a lot of our families are questioning their own parenting. We have some incredible parents who have got a lot of experience of parenting older children. And then this little person comes along and actually parenting style is completely different, or what has worked previously is not working now. And that can be really de-skilling for a parent. Parents are losing their confidence. If you have children who are, not that comfortable or confident at leaving the house or going somewhere new, we find that parents are retreating, becoming more and more isolated, as Meg said, and it can be really frustrating and overwhelming. So yes, lots of our families are not in a great place at all at the point that they come to us.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. And how does Portage kind of create that early support so it feels like partnership rather than scrutiny?
Well, Portage is entirely based around the family model. Everything we do is about being led by the parents, led by the child. We don't come in and say, right, your child needs to learn X, Y, and Z. It's about saying to the parents, what do you want? What do you want your child to be doing right this minute? What is the priority? And for some parents, that might be toileting, that might be communication. For others, it might be going to the family party that's coming up that's normally quite a traumatic experience. So it is very much based around listening and hearing the parents. I think lots of our parents say that they're not heard, but we take a lot of time. Our initial few visits are about getting to know the family and the family getting to know us. We're often going into the home, and it takes a lot of trust of a parent to accept that professional into the family home and putting their faith in us to support their child.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And for autistic children particularly, development doesn't always follow a straight line. So how do you help families understand that development isn't a race?
That's a really good question, actually. And it's something that we probably deal with on a daily basis. Of course, as a parent, you want your child to be doing well, and you cannot not compare. It is impossible to not compare your child to another child. But for us, it's about step by step, day by day, and sometimes hour by hour for our little people. Observation for me is the most powerful tool we can give anybody, rather than trying to teach, to rush in, to intervene and interject in child's play. I'll encourage parents to sit back, to observe, to really understand what that child is doing, what level of understanding they have, what makes them really excited, and using those kind of observations to power the next steps in their development.
Absolutely. And there's something really important in what you're saying there. The early support works best when it feels relational, not corrective. And I think that Meg was picking that up as well.
And we don't always, when we start working with a family, we don't go straight in and jump in with the child. Sometimes our initial visits are about having a cup of tea and a chat with the parent. That's where the relationship starts. And then the relationship begins with the child. We're coming into a family's home. We're on their turf. We're in their kind of environment. So it's about us respecting their family. Every family is different. So yeah, it is very much relational.
Yeah. And of course, we know that families don't exist in isolation. So they're also navigating many other health visitors, nurseries, potentially schools, waiting lists, lots and lots of things are going on all the time for the family, aren't they?
Absolutely.
So I'm going to bring Siân in. Siân, for many autistic children, toileting isn't just developmental. It can be sensory, anxiety driven, and it can be about unfamiliar environments. I'm sure that's probably true for all children, actually. Tell us a bit about Eric, and then I'll dive in with a question, if I may.
Sure. Thanks, Tracie. Lovely to be here. So Eric does three key things, really. For over 35 years, it supported families who have struggled with toileting issues with their children. So we provide a helpline and online chats for advice for parents, podcasts, lots and lots of information. We provide lots of specialist training for professionals, early years providers, health visitors. We have a specialist online shop as well that provides specialist products for families. So we're really about the whole holistic approach around the child and family with healthy bowels and bladders, being that expert voice and support for all professionals to support the child and family.
Thanks, Siân. So just tell us a bit about why is continence such an important early support issue?
Well, we know from research that those first 1,001 days of a child's life, from conception to, the age of 2, that's where all the foundations are laid for emotional, physical well-being and social skills, to lead that happy, healthy life. In society, there's a huge stigma about wee and poo. All children and adults, we all sleep, we walk, we talk, we eat, we drink, and we wee and we poo. But we don't talk about it. It is so important because all the evidence shows that starting early prevents complications further.
Definitely. We're seeing increasing numbers of children starting primary school not toilet trained. So what's happening nationally?
Well, I think the stats really quite surprising. So, for example, did you know that now 1 in 9 children suffer from a bowel or bladder problem across the UK? That's higher than the incidence of asthma. And 1 in 4 children are now not school ready and not toilet trained when they go to school. 1 in 3 children suffer from constipation. And in 23-24, more than 44,000 children were admitted to hospital with constipation. In England, there's been a 60% rise in a hospital diagnosis of primary age school children with constipation in the past decade. And we think that's underreported because when children turn up at A&E, they're quite often admitted with abdominal pain. So it's a real issue. Why is this happening? Society has changed. In the 1970s, 83% of children were potty trained and were out of nappies by 18 months. So potty training just started early as part of normal development. Now, over the last two generations, the average age for a child to be potty trained is 3 to 4. So you can see there's been this sort of whole generational shift. And it's a complex issue. There's not any one factor that's leading to that. There are a number of issues that have got us to where we are today.
I mean, I'm staggered by some of those statistics, I have to say. It really is quite eye-opening, isn't it? What would you say the physical consequences families may not realise, particularly around constipation and children withholding? What are the consequences on the child, on the family? And I guess what can we do to help? I mean, that's the important bit of all of this.
So I think if I start with what we can do to help, I think we have to go right back to basics, which is supporting families, carers, early years providers to really be the team around the child and to start early. So introducing potty training from an early age through play, having the potty in the room, teddies in the room. As soon as a small baby is able to sit up, have a good core, let's use the normal gastro reflex, if you like, after eating. If they've had their lunch, half an hour later, the normal physiological response is for the gut to start moving. So if a child is sitting up and they can be supported, just sit on a potty with teddy, have a story, you can start introducing potty training early. We've worked very closely with a coalition and collaboration of about 16 providers to improve the guidance. So there's new potty training guidance out there, and we're all advocating that they should be trained between 18 to 30 months. This is really important with children who may or may not have a diagnosis yet of a condition, because if you don't start potty training your child until they're 2 or 3, you may not be aware that they have a functional problem. And actually, by starting early, the problem may become clear. And just in terms of the effects of constipation on a child and the family, on the child, they become distressed. It's not simple like with an adult. You say, well, just drink more and have more fiber. Some children have what we call functional constipation, where there isn't a cause. And yes, a good diet and making sure they have plenty of fluids is important, but they actually need to be seen by a GP and treated appropriately with laxatives. It's a confusing picture for families because they say, well, I don't think my child's constipated because they keep passing watery stools perhaps around the constipation. But we know that that can lead to very, very difficult physical problems for children and hospitalization. So it can be very profound. And in fact, the large proportion of our calls to our helpline are around parents seeking support for children that are withholding and have constipation. So we're sort of having to go back to basics and support them as much as possible.
Yeah, thank you. And I think what's coming out in what all three of you have been saying actually is the team around the child, the relationship with parents, and having the right environments for everyday incidental learning about all the things that are important for your development as a child, regardless of whether or not you have a diagnosis of something.
Yeah, I think it really resonated with me when Meg said, it's that journey together. And when you said, Tracie, it's around, you have the sort of reassurance and action balance, and it's about sharing and having that sort of psychological safety piece and making these small, minor adjustments. Potty training and getting a child ready, any child ready to be toilet trained is not a singular one-off event. It's something that has to start through play. It's a process that just continues and small adjustments. So when Meg was talking about the environment having small adjustments, it might be that when a child is sitting on the toilet, they have a special block or a step underneath their feet. So their feet are flat. So that extends the gut. All these simple things, these small adjustments can support a child. And when Pam was talking about normalization and creating those opportunities for learning, and it's a strength-based model, it's supporting the family to be the first educators of their child, really.
It's also relevant for extended family members,
Absolutely.
his grandparents, it's siblings. It's about understanding that. I think one of the best pieces of advice we give based on the ERIC website is about where you do your toileting. So many families get caught I'm in a rush, I've got no time, I just need to change this nappy, so we'll do it in the lounge or we'll do it on the kitchen floor or whatever. But actually go into the bathroom so that child makes those really strong associations of toilet training, whether that's changing a nappy, using the toilet, washing hands, all of that happens in the bathroom.
Yes.
That's a real game changer, I think, for many families.
And I guess in settings like Dingley's Promise, Meg, you've probably got routines and structures in place that absolutely underpin what Siân was saying about a certain time after lunch, or, you get into routines, don't you?
Yeah, it is part of our everyday routines. And also in things like the bathroom, we've got the sort of visual timetable of the process of going to the toilet. And those are all things that we can share with families so we can support that process. I think as well, it's just being mindful of some of our children and the fact that they may have interoceptive sensory needs. They might not be recognizing that need to actually go to the toilet. So it's about that building it into routine to make it a really successful process for them. And I think as well, it's sharing with families that it's okay. This isn't going to happen overnight. We might fail 3 times over, but that's okay. Like it is that journey together, and you just being that constant positive person for the family. Because there are tough days, and when days are tough, sometimes we all just need that person to be like, come on, we've got this. It doesn't matter that they've had 5 accidents today, we're going to try again tomorrow. But just sharing all of that with the family is key, I think, when you're supporting any process, but especially around sort of toileting.
You can never have too many sets of spare clothes, can you, at this stage?
No.
Absolutely not.
I think that's really important. Listening to all 3 of you, what really strikes me is that early support only works when everyone's working together, when it's proportionate, we're not too late, we're not too fast, and not driven by fear. Love that journeying together alongside the family and so on. So there's a question that I'd like each of you to answer or build on with each other is, when people ask how early is too early, what misunderstandings is underneath that question?
I think it's really difficult because each child is an individual. We've spoken about that celebration of that unique child, and therefore early for one child is actually not early for another. So it's got to be what's right for the child. And it's without that pressure. I think sometimes we slip into territory where we might really push for those early pressurized steps because, they're going to school and we've got that kind of top-down school readiness pressure coming in. And I think it's about that reassurance for families that, yes, this is where ideally we need to be. But if you're not, the world's not going to stop turning. This is what we're going to do instead. This is the conversation we're going to have with the school. This is how we're going to make it better for your child so they can move from their inclusive early years setting to an inclusive mainstream or specialist school provision. So it's a really tricky balance, I think, between early and identified needs, which we need. I recognize that the earlier we can support families, the better impact we can have. But I think it just comes back to that whole being needs focused, not diagnosis focused, and each family being on their own individual journey.
I agree with that entirely. And I feel that from a Portage perspective, there is no such thing as it's too early. And in fact, we would much rather have a family known to one of our services so that even if it's just the child doesn't really need Portage right now, but actually this parent needs a bit of advice and guidance and support. And it may be that we put that child or that family onto a review. Well, let's come back in 3 months and see how they're doing. And knowing that that family has got that somebody to talk to say, is this right? Is this something we should be worried about? And I would much rather that happen as early as the families want it. And from my perspective, it has to be parent-led. So if the family is asking for help, that help should be there when they need it, when they want it, and when is going to be right for them.
Thank you, Pam. Siân, any additional thoughts on that?
Yes, I think in relation to bowel and bladder health and potty training, I've explained that culturally we've changed as a society. But basically, a child's anatomy, their gut anatomy, has not changed. It's still the same. What's changed is how things have been approached. So we absolutely advocate starting early for every child. And as that process commences and goes through, if a child then does have additional needs or there are other issues, that will come out during that process. But if you start late, you're getting intervention late, and then children end up having more problems, really. So early is brilliant. If families can start just normalizing, the early intervention to prevent health problems later on.
Thank you. And of course, in the context of the whole of this discussion, we're talking about anything early is powerful, whether that's potty training or whether that is sleep routines or whether that is play or communication or whatever. It would just be great if you could just distill into sort of one thing you'd want those parents and listeners to remember from today. What would it be?
Trust your instinct, trust your gut, trust your instincts, because 99% of our parents know exactly where their child is at, where their child perhaps should be, the trajectory that they should be on. And yeah, trust your gut. Parents know best.
And I think just be that advocate for your child. Don't be frightened to challenge, to champion. Like I said, find that safe person, but actually you really be the voice for you and your child, because like Pam said, no one knows them better than you.
Love that. Thank you. Siân?
Specifically around bowel and bladder issues, Eric, what we've done is trust our evidence base. So we've worked in collaboration with multiple organizations. We've updated the guides with Kindred Squared that's been endorsed by the Department of Education. We've just updated guidance in collaboration with the Institute of Health Visiting. So we've done that real closing the loop collaboration with all professionals, and use a team of expert professional advisors across the country who are specialist bowel and bladder nurses and consultants. So going to the TikTok thing, you need to be really careful there with what's on social media and so on, because it can just make parents feel that they are failing when they're not. So go to the evidence base, be reassured about what you're looking at, and go to your trusted person and have that conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you, all three of you. It's been a real pleasure having you talk today. I'm going to draw us to a close now. And at Beyond Autism, we often talk about keeping children included, not excluded. Inclusion doesn't begin in secondary school. It begins in the early years. And as everybody said here, it really begins in the family. That's where inclusion begins. When we get early support right, we reduce school anxiety later on. We reduce placement breakdowns. We reduce crisis later on. And early understanding is one of the strongest protective factors we have. So we've heard today that early support isn't about rushing. It isn't about labeling at the first sign of difference. And it certainly isn't about panic. It's about noticing. It's about responding. It's about building relationships. And it's about trusting that development is not a race. So for autistic children especially, the right early understanding can shape confidence, belonging, and inclusion for years to come. If you're listening and wondering whether you're doing enough, the very fact that you're asking that question, it's the right question. Reach out. Siân, Pam, and Meg all said, find your trusted person, talk to somebody, find the evidence base, go to the websites. You don't have to rush. You don't have to wait in silence, and you don't have to do this alone. And that came out clearly from all three of our guests today. So thank you to Meg, Pam, and Siân for your really thoughtful insights. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, share it with someone who might need it, and join us next month on Included, Not Excluded. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep inclusion at the heart of everything you do. Thank you all.